The night the Crimson Throne shattered, Seraphine Valdara learned that immortality meant nothing when your own blood turned against you. She remembered the exact moment, not because vampire memory was flawless, which it was, but because some betrayals carved themselves so deeply into the soul that even eternity couldn't dull their edge. Her younger brother Cassius, golden-eyed and ambitious, standing before the assembled court with their father's still warm crown in his hands. The accusations had been meticulously crafted. Conspiracy against the throne, forbidden consorting with humans, undermining the sacred purity of their bloodline. All lies, of course. But in the Byzantine politics of vampire nobility, truth was merely another commodity to be traded or discarded. "You are no longer Princess of House Valdara," Cassius had declared, his voice carrying the peculiar resonance of newly assumed authority. "You are no longer worthy of immortal blood." But in his infinite mercy our late father, may his name echo in the eternal night, decreed that even the fallen should know mercy. You will not face the dawn execution. Instead, you will face something far more fitting for one who loved humanity so pathetically. You will live among them. The curse had been elegant in its cruelty. A binding ritual performed by the court's most powerful blood mages, rewriting the fundamental magic that sustained her existence. She could no longer feed from humans without excruciating pain. She could no longer sire new vampires. She could no longer access the vast network of the Valdaran hive mind that connected all members of the royal house. Most devastating of all, her fertility, the one gift that made royal vampires precious beyond measure, had been locked behind an arcane seal that only her own genuine emotional surrender could break. "You wanted to be human so badly," Cassius had whispered as the guards dragged her toward the exile portal. "Now you'll spend eternity as neither vampire nor mortal. A thing between worlds. Enjoy your freedom, sister." That had been 17 months ago. 17 months of wandering the borderlands between the vampire territories and human settlements, surviving on animal blood that tasted like ash and betrayal, watching her once magnificent wings, those great membranous extensions that marked royalty, grow tattered and dull from malnutrition. 17 months of learning what it meant to be truly alone after 3 centuries of being part of something vast and terrible and beautiful. The ruins of Talia's Rest had become her refuge. Once a prosperous border city where human and vampire merchants had traded under carefully negotiated truces, it now stood as a monument to the same paranoid isolationism that had destroyed her life. When her brother took power, one of his first acts had been to sever all official human contact. The city had been abandoned within weeks, its mixed population scattering like leaves before a storm. She'd claimed what had once been an apothecary shop near the city's edge, where crumbling vampire architecture, all soaring arches and blood-red stone, merged awkwardly with human practicality. The building still bore faint protective runes on its walls, their crimson glow now so dim they were barely visible. She'd cleared out the debris, salvaged what she could, and created something almost livable in the ruins of 2 civilizations that could no longer bear each other's existence. Tonight, the blood moon hung swollen and heavy in the sky, painting everything in shades of rust and darkness. Seraphine stood at what remained of her window, wrapped in the tattered remnants of her exile cloak, once royal purple trimmed with silver, now faded to something between ash and memory. Her reflection in the broken glass was a ghost of what she'd been, still beautiful in the way vampire nobility was always beautiful, but hollowed out, diminished. Her crimson eyes, which had once blazed with ancient power, now glowed with barely more intensity than dying embers. She was contemplating, as she did most nights, whether immortality was truly a gift when you had no purpose left to fill it, when she heard the sound that would change everything, the rough cough of a combustion engine, impossibly close, and the sharp yelp of something in pain. Seraphine moved to the window with the fluid speed that even exile couldn't take from her. In the ruined plaza below, a battered human vehicle, they called them jeeps, she remembered, had come to a grinding halt. A man emerged, moving with quick efficiency despite the obvious exhaustion in his frame. He was tall for a human, with sun-darkened skin that spoke of days spent under the merciless light that would kill her in minutes. His clothes were practical, cargo pants covered in dust, a field jacket bearing symbols she recognized as human medical insignia, and heavy boots made for rough terrain. But what captured her attention was what he pulled from the back of the vehicle. A wolf, massive and gray, with blood matting its fur and one leg bent at an unnatural angle. The animal was semi-conscious, whimpering in pain, and the man, was speaking to it in low, soothing tones as he struggled to carry it toward one of the more intact buildings. Something stirred in Seraphine's chest, an emotion so unexpected she almost didn't recognize it. Curiosity, laced with something dangerously close to hope. She'd seen humans before, of course, had even, in her naive youth, believed they could be partners rather than prey. But she'd never seen one like this here in the dead zone between their worlds, caring for an animal with the kind of tenderness she'd thought only existed in romantic human fairy tales. She should have stayed hidden. Should have let him pass through without revealing herself. The last thing she needed was the complication of human contact, especially given her condition. But the wolf's pain called to something deep in her nature. Vampires were apex predators, yes, but the royal bloodlines had always held a strange affinity for the wild things of the world, the creatures that existed in the spaces between civilization and chaos. Before she'd made a conscious decision, Seraphine found herself moving. She descended from her refuge with barely a whisper of sound, her feet touching the cracked stone of the plaza without disturbing even the dust. The blood moon cast her shadow long and strange, her tattered wings spreading slightly as she approached, an unconscious display that marked her nature even to someone who'd never seen a vampire before. "Stop," she called out, her voice carrying the harmonic resonance that even exile couldn't fully strip away. "You're carrying him wrong. You'll sever what's left of the artery in his leg." The man spun, one hand dropping to something at his belt, a weapon presumably, while the other remained supporting the wolf. His eyes went wide as he took her in, the inhuman paleness of her skin in the moonlight, the faint glow of her crimson eyes, the wings that marked her as something that shouldn't exist in his carefully rational world. But he didn't drop the wolf. That, more than anything, told her what kind of man he was. What are you?" he demanded, his voice rough with exhaustion and adrenaline but steady nonetheless. Seraphine moved closer, slowly, keeping her movements deliberately non-threatening. This close she could smell him, human sweat and medicinal herbs, old coffee and newer fear, and underneath it all, that peculiar warmth that marked living blood. Her fangs ached with phantom hunger, but the curse held, she couldn't feed even if she wanted to. "Someone who knows trauma medicine better than most," she said, nodding toward the wolf. "I can help. But we need to move quickly. That bone is splintered. Without proper setting, he'll lose the leg and probably his life." The man's eyes darted between her and the dying animal, calculation visible in his expression. She could see the moment he made his choice, the same kind of desperate necessary trust that came when death was the only alternative. "All right," he said. "But if this is some kind of trick. If I wanted you dead, human, you would have been dead before you heard me speak," Seraphine interrupted, allowing a touch of her old royal authority to enter her voice. "Now follow me. And for the love of whatever gods you pray to, keep his leg elevated." She turned and walked toward her refuge without looking back, listening to the sound of his labored breathing as he followed. Behind them, the blood moon watched like a vast red eye, and somewhere in the ruins, something ancient stirred at the scent of human blood walking willingly into a vampire's den. The interior of Seraphine's refuge existed in a strange twilight between two worlds. Human furniture salvaged from the ruins, a sturdy wooden table, chairs with only minor damage, oil lamps that still functioned, mixed with the remnants of her old life. A tapestry bearing her family crest hung on one wall, its silver thread tarnished but still visible. Crystalline vampire medical instruments, powered by blood magic, lay carefully arranged on a shelf next to decidedly mundane human surgical tools she'd scavenged and taught herself to use. The man stopped in the doorway, his burden heavy in his arms, his eyes adjusting to the dim red glow of the ancient runes. Seraphine had already moved to the table, sweeping aside maps and old books with quick efficiency. "Here," she commanded. "Lay him down gently. Support the head." He complied, and she got her first good look at him in the improved light. Mid-30s, perhaps, with the weathered competence of someone who'd spent years in difficult places doing difficult work. His face was strong-featured, marked with the small scars of a life lived actively. Most striking were his eyes, deep brown, almost black in the moonlight, but carrying an intensity of focus she recognized. This was someone who understood the weight of a life in his hands. "Veterinarian?" she asked, nodding to the insignia on his jacket as she began examining the wolf. "Dr. Marcus Webb," he confirmed, moving to the opposite side of the table without being asked, falling into the natural rhythm of medical assistance. "Field veterinarian with the Human Border Relief Corps. We provide medical care for the settlements near the territories." He hesitated on the last part, clearly uncertain how to reference the vampire lands to one of their kind. Seraphine almost smiled. "You can say vampire territories, Dr. Webb. I won't be offended." She gently probed the wolf's damaged leg, feeling the complex break beneath her fingers. "In fact, I was born in the heart of them. Castle Valdara, the Crimson Throne itself." She felt rather than saw his sharp intake of breath. "Then you're exiled?" She cut him off, her voice flat. "Cursed and cast out. Whatever you've heard about vampire nobility, I assure you it's simultaneously less and more terrible than your stories suggest." Her fingers found the severed artery she'd warned him about. "Clamp. In the red case on the shelf behind you." Marcus moved quickly, finding the crystal instrument she'd indicated. It pulsed with faint red light as she took it, responding to the trace magic still in her blood. She positioned it carefully, whispering the activation phrase in the old tongue. The crystal sealed around the damaged vessel, stabilizing it. "Impressive," Marcus murmured, his medical professional's curiosity clearly warring with his survival instinct. "I've never seen biotechnology like that." "It's not technology," Seraphine corrected, already moving to the next phase. "It's blood magic. Ancient medicine from when my kind first learned that keeping prey alive longer made for better feeding." She caught his expression and felt a cold satisfaction. "Uncomfortable? Good. Never forget what I am, Dr. Webb. It will keep us both safer." They worked in focused silence for the next hour. The wolf had been struck by something large, probably one of the armored patrols that both human and vampire forces ran along the border. The compound fracture was severe, but not beyond repair if they moved quickly. Seraphine guided Marcus through the process, using a combination of her vampire knowledge of anatomy, predators understood their prey's bodies intimately, and his practical surgical experience. She found herself impressed despite her instincts. He had steady hands and an intuitive understanding of when to act and when to wait. More than that, he showed no fear once the work began, focusing entirely on the patient before them. It was a rare quality in humans, that ability to compartmentalize terror in service of something greater. "There," Seraphine said finally, securing the last of the bandaging. "The bone will need 6 weeks to fully heal. The artery repair should hold, but he'll need monitoring for infection." Marcus nodded, exhaustion finally showing in his face. "Thank you. Truly. I've been driving for 6 hours trying to find somewhere safe to stop. When I saw the lights of the city, I thought it was abandoned, but I was desperate enough to try anyway." "It is abandoned," Seraphine said, moving to a small basin to wash the blood from her hands. "You were just fortunate enough to find the one remaining resident." She paused, studying him. "Why did you risk it? The border zones are dangerous. No animal is worth your life." "Isn't he?" Marcus's hand rested gently on the wolf's head, his touch tender despite his exhaustion. "Besides, I'm a veterinarian. Saving animals isn't what I do. It's what I am." Something in those words resonated painfully in Seraphine's chest. Once, she too had known what she was with such certainty. Princess. Heir to an ancient bloodline. Protector of her people's future. Now she was only absence, not vampire enough, too vampire for anything else. "You should rest," she said, her voice softer than intended. "There's a room in the back. Basic but intact. I don't sleep much, so I'll monitor your patient." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but another look at the wolf, breathing more steadily now, the immediate crisis past, seemed to decide him. "All right. But I'll need to check on him in a few hours." Of course. Seraphine gestured toward the back corridor. Dr. Webb? Thank you for trusting me. I know it wasn't easy. He turned, meeting her eyes with that steady, assessing gaze. You could have killed me at any point tonight. You chose to save a life instead. That tells me more than any reputation or species ever could. After he'd gone, Seraphine stood alone in the red-lit gloom of her refuge, listening to the steady breathing of the sleeping wolf and the distant settling of the ruins outside. Her hands, still faintly stained with blood despite the washing, trembled slightly. It had been so long since someone had trusted her. So long since she'd felt useful, necessary, part of something beyond her own survival. Dangerous, whispered the part of her that had survived exile. Don't let yourself hope. Don't let yourself feel. You know where that leads. But as she settled into a chair to keep watch over her unexpected patient, Seraphine found herself remembering something her mother had told her, centuries ago before court politics had hardened her into something cold and calculating. Power is what others fear you'll do to them. Purpose is what you do for them regardless. Perhaps, she thought, watching the blood moon slowly cross the sky beyond her broken window, there was still a purpose left for a fallen princess in this space between worlds. She just hadn't imagined it would walk into her refuge on two legs, carrying a dying wolf and offering her the rarest gift of all, the simple assumption that she might still be capable of goodness. Marcus woke to the smell of brewing coffee and the surreal realization that he was still alive. The room was exactly as sparse as promised, a sleeping pallet that had probably once been luxurious but now showed its age, a small chest of drawers, a window carefully covered with thick material that let in no light. The latter detail reminded him with visceral clarity exactly where he was and whose hospitality he was enjoying. He found his host in the main chamber, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the makeshift operating table, one pale hand resting gently on the wolf's flank. The animal was awake, its yellow eyes tracking Marcus as he entered, but it made no move to rise. More telling, it showed no fear of the vampire maintaining her vigil. He's been awake for about an hour, Seraphine said without turning. Thirsty, confused, but the pain seems manageable. I've been maintaining a low-grade analgesic field. She gestured, and Marcus saw the faint shimmer around her hand. Magic, he realized, being used as casually as he might use a thermometer. You can do that? He asked, moving to check the wolf's vitals. Pulse steady, eyes clear. The leg splint held firm. Royal vampires have certain affinities, she said, and there was something bitter in her tone. My particular gift was always healing rather than destruction. You can imagine how useful my family found that. She finally turned to look at him, and in the better light of morning, filtered through the covered windows and supplemented by oil lamps, he could see her more clearly. She was devastatingly beautiful in the way all vampires supposedly were, but it was a beauty edged with exhaustion. Her pale skin showed faint traces of strain around the eyes, her silver-black hair was bound back in a practical braid that couldn't quite contain its wild length, and her wings, those great membranous structures, hung slightly limp, showing tears and thin patches that looked almost like scar tissue. Coffee? She gestured to a small camping stove where a battered pot percolated. I don't drink it, but I've kept the supplies for the occasional desperate traveler. You're the first one in 8 months, but I'm an optimist. The self-deprecating humor surprised him. Marcus accepted the offered cup, noting that her hands never quite touched his. Careful, he realized, to avoid any contact that might make him uncomfortable. The coffee was strong and bitter and exactly what he needed. How long have you been here? He asked, watching her move around the space with fluid grace. She walked like water moved, each gesture economical and precise. Since my exile. 17 months, 3 weeks, 4 days. She caught his expression. Vampire memory. We don't forget. Ever. It's less useful than you'd think. Why here specifically? Seraphine was quiet for a long moment, her crimson eyes distant. Because this place represents what I believed in. What got me exiled. She moved to the window, touching the covered glass. Talia's rest was supposed to be proof that our peoples could coexist. A neutral city where trade and culture could flow both directions. I championed its founding, spent decades negotiating the treaties that made it possible. What happened? My brother happened. The words were soft but edged with old pain. Cassius saw cooperation as weakness. When he orchestrated Father's death and my exile, shutting down Talia's rest was his first major act. A symbol, you see. The old ways were dead. Purity was the future. Humans were prey or enemies, never partners. She turned back to him, and Marcus saw something raw in her expression. I stayed because leaving would mean he was right. That this place, this idea, was worthless. And because, she hesitated. Because I had nowhere else to go. The vulnerability in that admission struck him deeply. Marcus had spent his career in liminal spaces. Field hospitals, refugee camps, border zones where desperation made strange bedfellows of natural enemies. He recognized the particular species of loneliness that came from being too dangerous to be wanted but too useful to be completely abandoned. I need to ask you something, he said carefully. Last night, you knew exactly what was wrong with him almost immediately. Your medical knowledge is extensive. But you're living alone in ruins, barely surviving from what I can see. Why? Seraphine's laugh was hollow. Because my dear brother was nothing if not thorough. She moved to the shelf of crystal instruments, touching them with something like mourning. The curse he laid on me did more than exile me from vampire territory. It locked away most of what makes a royal vampire valuable. I can't feed from humans without agony. I can't sire new vampires. I can't access the hive mind. And most importantly, most ironically, my fertility is sealed. She picked up one of the crystals, watching it pulse weakly in her hand. Royal vampires are different from common-born, Dr. Webb. We can bear children, true children, not just sired progeny. It's rare, difficult, and dangerous but possible. And in a species where immortality means population growth is nearly zero, that makes us precious beyond measure. Marriage alliances between royal houses are worth wars. Understanding dawned cold in Marcus's chest. He took away your value to your own people. Precisely. Without the ability to provide heirs, I'm worthless as a political asset. Without the ability to feed properly, I'm weak and easy to eliminate if I become inconvenient. He engineered a perfect exile. I'm technically free, but I have no function, no purpose, no future except endless existence in this deteriorating state. She set the crystal down with exquisite care. The curse can only be broken one way, if I genuinely, willingly surrender myself to someone. Not politically, not strategically, but emotionally, completely. The kind of surrender that requires actual trust and vulnerability. He bet you'd never do that. He bet correctly. I've spent 3 centuries in a court where every kindness was manipulation and every alliance was temporary. Where I watched my own mother poison 3 rivals before breakfast and call it statecraft. Trust isn't just difficult for me, Dr. Webb. It's nearly impossible. She met his eyes. So yes, I have all this knowledge, all these skills, and absolutely no way to use them that matters. I'm a surgeon with no patience, a princess with no kingdom, a vampire who can barely feed. I am functionally meaningless. The utter desolation in those words hung in the air between them. Marcus found himself moving before thinking, crossing the space between them. He stopped just outside her personal space, close enough to matter but not so close as to threaten. You saved his life, he said, nodding toward the wolf. Last night, you saved a life that had no political value, no strategic importance. You did it because it needed doing. That's not meaningless. Seraphine stared at him, something almost like pain flickering across her features. Why are you here, Dr. Webb? Really? The border zones are dangerous for everyone, but for a human medical professional there's suicide. The Corps must have safer assignments. Now it was Marcus's turn to look away. I had a practice once. In the capital. Successful, respectable. Mostly treating companion animals for wealthy families. He touched the insignia on his jacket. Then the war came. The real war, not just the border skirmishes. I was conscripted as a field medic. Saw things that changed what mattered to me. He moved to the window beside her, looking at the covered glass as if he could see through it to the ruined city beyond. After the ceasefire, I couldn't go back to diagnosing pampered dogs. So I joined the Corps. We go where people, where animals, need help and can't pay for it. Border settlements, refugee camps, disaster zones. And yes, sometimes into the spaces between territories where technically we shouldn't exist. That's why you were carrying a dire wolf through a dead city at night. His pack was killed by a mine cluster left over from the war. He was the only survivor. I couldn't just leave him. Marcus turned to her. You asked why I'm here. I'm here because there's suffering everywhere that no one else is willing to address. I'm here because being comfortable felt like being complicit. I'm here because you need purpose more than you need safety, Seraphine finished softly. Their eyes met, and Marcus felt the strange vertigo of recognition. Despite everything that separated them, species, lifespan, the fundamental nature of their existence, they were variations on the same theme. People who'd found themselves unable to exist in the worlds they'd been born into and had chosen the hard grace of the margins instead. The sun is up, Seraphine said, though no light penetrated the covered windows. You should eat something. There's dried food in the cabinet, human food, I kept it for emergencies. I need to, she gestured vaguely. Vampires don't sleep exactly, but we need rest periods when the sun is up. Especially in my condition. Of course. Marcus stepped back, giving her space. Will you be? I'll be fine. I've lasted this long. But there was something fragile in her voice that suggested fine was a generous interpretation. She moved toward the back corridor, then paused. Dr. Webb? Marcus. Thank you. For trusting me with him. For not seeing just the monster. Thank you for proving there was something else to see. After she'd gone, Marcus sat with the wolf, who he'd mentally started calling Shadow because some things needed names, and tried to process the surreal turn his life had taken. A vampire princess. Exiled and cursed. Living alone in ruins, using ancient magical medicine to save a dying wolf brought to her by a human stranger. The universe, he reflected, had a strange sense of narrative symmetry. He spent the day tending to Shadow, exploring the refuge carefully, and trying not to think too hard about the fact that he was technically trapped in a vampire's lair until nightfall made travel safe again. But nothing about the space suggested a predator's den. Instead, it felt like what it was. A lonely refuge maintained by someone trying very hard to hold on to dignity in circumstances designed to strip it away. Evening came with merciful coolness. Marcus was attempting to prepare a meal from the ancient supplies, dried meat of questionable origin, some kind of grain, bottled water, when Seraphine emerged. She looked slightly better, though better was relative. The rest had obviously helped, but she still had the fragile quality of something maintaining itself through sheer willpower. You don't have to leave immediately, she said, and Marcus heard the careful neutrality in her voice, offering without demanding, hoping without expecting. The border zones are more dangerous at night, even for vehicles. And Shadow shouldn't be moved for at least another day. The artery repair needs more time to stabilize. Marcus considered. The smart move was to leave as soon as possible, to put distance between himself and complications. But smart moves had never been his strong suit. If I stay, he said carefully, will you feed? Properly, I mean. Not whatever minimal survival you've been doing. Her expression went wary. I told you I can't feed from humans. The curse. But you can feed from animals, can't you? That's why you knew so much about Shadow's blood flow. You've been doing it, barely getting by. He gestured to his medical kit. I have supplies. Anticoagulants, clean collection gear. We could set up a proper system. Nothing that would harm him, just enough to keep you functional. Seraphine stared at him like he'd suggested she sprout wings and fly. Which technically she could do if she were healthy enough. You would help me feed? Her voice was very small. You saved his life. More than that, you trusted me in your space, gave me shelter, shared your story. The least I can do is help you maintain your health. Marcus met her eyes steadily. Besides, I've spent my career as a veterinarian. Dietary support for exotic species is literally in my job description. The joke startled a laugh out of her, genuine and surprised. Exotic species. Is that what I am? Well, you're certainly not a common house cat. This time her laugh was fuller, and Marcus saw something in her relax. The careful guard she'd maintained, the wall between hope and survival, cracked just slightly. "All right," she said. "But we do it properly. Medical protocol. No risks to the patient." They worked together as night deepened around the refuge, setting up a careful feeding system that would let Seraphine supplement her meager diet without harming Shadow. Marcus watched her work with the blood, clinical, precise, almost reverent in her care, and understood that whatever else she was genuinely trying to be good in a universe that had given her every reason to be otherwise. Afterward, as she disposed of the medical waste with exacting care, he saw color returning to her skin, her eyes brightening to their full crimson intensity, her wings straightening slightly as strength flowed back into them. "Better?" he asked. "Much." She flexed her hands, studying them like they were new. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to be actually nourished rather than just sustained. Thank you." They settled into an evening routine that felt surreal in its domesticity. Marcus prepared his makeshift meal while Seraphine worked on repairing some of her equipment, the two of them sharing the space in comfortable silence. Shadow slept between them, his presence a living bridge between their worlds. "Can I ask you something personal?" Marcus said eventually. "You've seen me feed and heard my life's most humiliating secrets. I think we're past formality. The curse your brother placed, the part about emotional surrender. What exactly does that mean?" Seraphine was quiet for a long time, her hands stilling on the crystal she'd been polishing. "The exact wording as laid down by the blood mages is that the seal will break when I willingly offer myself, body and purpose, to one whose strength I acknowledge and whose judgment I trust above my own survival. It's not about physical submission. It's about finding someone I trust enough to make myself completely vulnerable to. Someone I would choose over my own life. That seems impossibly specific. That's the point. Cassius knows me. Knows that 3 centuries of court intrigue taught me that vulnerability is death. The curse is designed to be unbreakable because breaking it requires me to become someone fundamentally different than who I am." She turned to look at him, and in the lamplight, her eyes seemed to glow with inner fire. "It would require me to believe that someone exists who wouldn't use my vulnerability to destroy me. And I have 300 years of evidence suggesting that person doesn't exist." Marcus thought about that, about the elaborate cruelty of engineering a curse specifically designed around someone's trauma. About how it made her salvation require the one thing her entire life had taught her was impossible. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think you're stronger than your brother understood. You've survived this long alone. That takes a kind of strength that court vampires probably can't comprehend. Or it takes cowardice. The inability to choose the quick death over the slow one. Or it takes hope. The belief that maybe, eventually, things could be different." Seraphine looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. Then she rose with fluid grace, moving to the covered window. "It's full dark now. If you wanted to leave, this would be the safest time. I've kept you long enough." It was clearly a test. An offering of freedom. Marcus recognized the shape of it. She was giving him the chance to walk away from complications, from danger, from the weight of her story. The smart choice. He'd never been good at smart choices. "Shadow needs another day of stability before he should be moved," Marcus said. "And honestly, I could use the rest. If you don't mind the company?" The relief that flickered across her face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. "I don't mind," she said softly. "Not at all." 3 days became a week. A week became 2. Marcus told himself it was about Shadow's recovery, which was true but not the whole truth. The dire wolf was healing remarkably well under Seraphine's care. Her magic-assisted medicine combined with Marcus's practical veterinary knowledge created a synergy neither could have achieved alone. But by day 10 Shadow was walking on the injured leg, and by day 14 he was pestering them both for food with the imperious authority of a completely healthy predator. The real reason Marcus stayed was harder to articulate and more dangerous to acknowledge. Working with Seraphine was unlike anything he'd experienced. She had centuries of accumulated knowledge, an intuitive understanding of anatomy and physiology that went beyond textbook learning into the realm of instinct. But she also listened, truly listened, when he explained human medical developments she'd missed during her isolation. Their conversations ranged from surgical techniques to philosophical debates about the ethics of intervention, from practical jokes about their worst patients to surprisingly deep discussions about the nature of healing itself. "We're fixers," Seraphine said one evening as they cleaned surgical instruments together. Shadow was outside, investigating the ruins under the blood moon's light. His strength returned. "Both of us. We see something broken and we can't rest until we've at least tried to repair it. It's not about success or failure. It's about the attempt itself." "Is that a vampire thing or a you thing?" Marcus asked. "Definitely a me thing. Most vampires see the world in terms of power, who has it, who wants it, how to acquire or maintain it. I always saw it in terms of function. What works? What's broken? How do we make the systems sustain themselves better?" She held up a crystal instrument, checking its internal structure with a practiced eye. "Made me terrible at politics. Made me good at absolutely everything else." Marcus had learned to read her moods by then, to catch the moments when the weight of exile pressed too heavily. This was one of them, the pride in her competence tangled with the grief of having no sphere to apply it in. "You could, he said carefully. "Could what?" "Come back with me. To the human territories. The Corps is always desperate for medical personnel, and your knowledge would be invaluable. You wouldn't be the first vampire to. I would be the first exiled royal vampire to defect to humans." Seraphine cut him off, her voice sharp. "Do you understand what that would mean? I'm already a political embarrassment to my brother. If I actively aided humans, I'd become a legitimate threat. He'd send assassins. Real ones, not court intrigue but actual death squad operatives. And everyone around me would be targets too." She set down the instrument with excessive care, a sign Marcus had learned meant she was fighting for control. "I've already destroyed one dream of coexistence by being foolish enough to believe in it. I won't destroy lives by dragging more people into my disaster." "So you just stay here? Alone? Forever?" "I stay here alive, which is more than I'd be if I gave Cassius an excuse to eliminate me completely." She met his eyes, and her expression was ancient with sorrow. "I know it's not what you want to hear. But this is the reality of vampire politics. Some prisons are made of circumstances, not bars." The conversation haunted Marcus for days afterward. Not because he disagreed, she was clearly right about the danger, but because the resignation in her voice suggested she'd given up on the possibility of anything better. And that bothered him more than it should have. He told himself it was professional concern, that he was simply invested in a patient's welfare broadly defined. But at night, lying in the spare room of a vampire princess's refuge, listening to her move through the main chamber with soft grace, he had to acknowledge that his feelings had become complicated in ways he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't attraction in the simple physical sense, though he'd have been blind not to recognize her beauty. It was something deeper and more dangerous: recognition. In Seraphine he saw the same stubborn idealism that had driven him to the core, the same inability to accept that some things couldn't be fixed, the same tendency to sacrifice personal happiness for abstract principles. She was what he might become if he lived long enough and lost thoroughly enough, still clinging to purpose in a world that had no place for it. He was mulling over these uncomfortable thoughts on the 16th evening when Seraphine came to him with an expression he'd learned to dread, carefully neutral, which meant something had gone very wrong. "We have a problem," she said. Shadow, lying near Marcus's feet, raised his head with interest. His recovery was complete now, his coat glossy with health, his bearing that of a predator in his prime. They'd been planning Marcus's departure for the next day, a discussion that had been happening with increasing reluctance on both sides. What kind of problem? The kind with armor and weapons. She moved to the window, gesturing for him to join her. "Vampire patrol. 6 soldiers, heavy equipment. They're doing a sweep of the city." Marcus's blood went cold. "What?" "This place has been abandoned for over a year. Because someone reported activity here. Lights, movement, human presence." Her eyes met his and he saw guilt in them. "I've been careless. Too comfortable. I should have maintained better concealment, but she broke off, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter now. They're 3 blocks away and closing. You need to leave. Now. I'm not leaving you to face them alone. Marcus. She gripped his shoulders and he felt the strength in her hands. Even diminished by exile, she was far more powerful than any human. Listen to me. If they find you here with me, they will kill you. Slowly. As an example of what happens to humans who consort with exiles. And they will report back to my brother that I'm harboring humans, which gives him the excuse he needs to send a real execution squad. So we both leave. I have a vehicle we can... I can't. The words came out hollow. The terms of my exile bind me to the border zones. If I cross into pure human territory, the curse triggers a fatal response. If I cross back into vampire lands, I'm subject to immediate execution. She released him, stepping back. I'm literally trapped here. But you're not. So please, Marcus. Please run. Everything in him rebelled against the idea. He'd spent 2 weeks working beside her, talking with her, watching her fight every day to maintain dignity in impossible circumstances. The idea of just abandoning her to whatever was coming felt like a betrayal of something fundamental. But she was right. He could hear them now, the mechanical sound of armored units, the sharp commands in the vampire tongue. Trained soldiers who would see his presence as proof of exactly the kind of transgression they'd been taught to exterminate. Shadow, Marcus said, and the dire wolf moved to his side immediately. Some bond had formed during the recovery, the kind of connection that sometimes happened between healer and patient. Can you hide him? If they find a healthy dire wolf here, they'll know someone with medical knowledge has been around. Seraphine looked at Shadow, then back to Marcus, and something shifted in her expression. The catacombs, she said. Under the apothecary. Old smuggling tunnels from when the city was active. Take him down, there's an access panel behind the tapestry in the back room. Follow the left fork. It'll take you to an exit about half a mile outside the city walls. She moved with sudden purpose, grabbing his medical kit and a bundle of supplies. Take these. The tunnels are dry but dark. There's a flashlight in the side pocket. And Marcus. She pressed something into his hand, a crystal vial glowing with faint red light. My blood. If you're ever injured beyond normal healing, break this and drink it. It won't turn you, but it'll trigger enhanced regeneration. One use only. He stared at the vial, understanding the significance. Vampire blood was valuable, royal blood exponentially more so. This wasn't just a gift. It was a piece of her life force, freely given. Seraphine, go. But she didn't move away. For a long moment they stood close, the sounds of approaching danger growing louder. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. For seeing past the monster. For making me remember what purpose felt like. Marcus did something then that was probably foolish, definitely dangerous, and completely necessary. He reached up and touched her face, gently, carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Her skin was cool beneath his palm, smooth as marble but somehow alive, and her crimson eyes went wide with something that might have been wonder. This isn't goodbye, he said. I'm not that easy to get rid of. Once Shadow is safe, once the patrol moves on, I'm coming back. We're going to figure out something better than you just existing in ruins. That's not a suggestion. That's a promise. Before she could argue, before he could second-guess the commitment, he pulled back and whistled for Shadow. The dire wolf followed him to the back room, and together they found the access panel exactly where she'd said. The last thing Marcus saw before descending into darkness was Seraphine standing alone in the red glow of her refuge, one hand pressed to her cheek where he'd touched her, her expression caught between hope and heartbreak. The catacombs were everything she'd promised, dark, dry, and ancient. Marcus used the flashlight sparingly, letting his eyes adjust to the minimal light. Shadow moved confidently beside him, his predator's senses far better suited to the darkness. Behind and above them, Marcus heard the sounds of the patrol entering the building. He stopped, every instinct screaming at him to go back. But he forced himself forward, following the left fork, trusting that Seraphine could handle herself better without a vulnerable human complicating matters. The tunnel stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. When they finally emerged, It was into a scrubland outside the city proper, under the vast red moon that painted everything in shades of blood and shadow. Marcus took several deep breaths of the cool night air, trying to slow his racing heart. Beside him, Shadow whined softly, looking back toward the city. The wolf felt it too, the wrongness of leaving someone behind. "I know," Marcus murmured, checking his watch. 2 hours until dawn. He'd wait until then, until the patrol would have moved on or at least withdrawn for the day. Then he'd circle back, check on her, make sure. The explosion lit up the night sky like a second sun. Marcus spun, watching in horror as a fireball erupted from the heart of Talia's Rest, right where the apothecary would be. The blast was followed by the distinctive crackle of blood magic weapons, military grade, designed to incapacitate or kill vampire targets. He was running before conscious thought caught up, Shadow loping beside him. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this was suicide, that he was human and fragile and would die in seconds if he walked into whatever was happening. But the rest of him, the part that had driven every major decision of his life, knew only that Seraphine was in that fire and he'd promised to come back. Some promises mattered more than survival. The apothecary was an inferno. Marcus approached from the east, using the ruins for cover, Shadow pressed low against his side. The vampire patrol had established a perimeter, 6 soldiers as Seraphine had said, all in the distinctive black armor of house troops, all carrying weapons that glowed with contained blood magic. But his attention was on the building itself, on the flames that seemed to feed on both physical materials and something else, something that made the air shimmer with unnatural heat. "Incendiary curse fire," said a voice behind him, and Marcus spun to find Seraphine crouched in the shadow of a collapsed wall, her face smudged with soot, one wing torn and bleeding. "They're thorough, I'll give them that." Relief and anger hit Marcus in equal measure. "You're alive. For now." She was breathing hard, pain evident in every line of her body. "They didn't come to investigate. They came to execute. Someone, Cassius probably, decided I'd been embarrassment enough. We need to get you out of here. Where exactly do you propose we go?" Her laugh was bitter. "I told you, Marcus. I'm trapped in the border zones. The moment I cross the threshold either direction, the curse kills me more effectively than any fire." One of the soldiers shouted something in the vampire tongue, gesturing toward their position. They'd been spotted. Seraphine moved with the speed of desperation, pulling Marcus deeper into the ruins as crystal bolts shattered stone where they'd been crouched. Shadow snarled, his hackles raised, but Marcus held him back. A dire wolf was formidable, but against armored vampires with military weapons, he'd be dead in seconds. "Listen to me," Seraphine said, her hands gripping his shoulders. "There's one way out of this. One chance. But it requires you to trust me completely, and it will change your life in ways you can't undo. Tell me." She met his eyes, and in the firelight, her crimson gaze was blazing. "I can give you my blood. Not the vial, that's for healing. I mean a direct exchange. Vampire blood, taken directly from the source in sufficient quantity, creates a bond. You'd gain enhanced strength, speed, resilience. Not full vampire abilities, but enough to survive what's coming. Enough to fight. What's the cost? You'd be bound to me. Partially, not completely, but enough that other vampires could sense it. You'd be marked as mine, under my protection. Which, given that I'm exiled, means you'd inherit my pariah status. And the process," she hesitated. "It's intimate. Feeding from vampires works both ways. You'd see my memories, feel my emotions. And I'd taste your blood in exchange, see your thoughts. There are no secrets after something like that." More shouts. The patrol was triangulating their position, moving with coordinated precision. Marcus had maybe 60 seconds before they were surrounded. He thought about everything that had led him to this moment. A career built on saving lives others deemed worthless. A war that taught him comfortable safety was an illusion. A choice to work in the margins because the center had nothing left to teach him. And 2 weeks with a broken vampire princess who'd somehow become the most real person he'd met in years. "Do it," he said. Seraphine's eyes widened. "Marcus, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You need help. I have the means to provide it. And you're right, I trust you completely. He pulled back his collar, exposing his neck in the gesture he'd seen in a dozen human movies about vampires, all of which had probably gotten everything wrong. Whatever comes after, we'll face together. Now please, before we both die and make this conversation pointless. Something broke in her expression, the last careful wall she'd been maintaining, the final defense against hope. This isn't how I imagined. But she didn't finish. Instead, she pulled him close with sudden fierce tenderness. This will hurt, she whispered against his throat. Try not to scream. It attracts attention. Her fangs pierced his skin with a cold precision that was nothing like pain and everything like it simultaneously. Marcus felt the pull of blood leaving his body, but more than that, he felt something else flowing in, ancient power, wild magic, and underneath it all, Seraphine herself. The memories hit like a flood. A child learning to fly under red moonlight, proud beyond measure of her newfound wings. A young vampire realizing she could heal as well as harm, understanding she was different from her predator kin. Centuries of court politics, watching her idealism slowly crushed under the weight of her family's cruelty. The moment of exile, when her own brother looked at her with such cold satisfaction as the curse took hold. Months of loneliness, of maintaining dignity in the face of annihilation, of choosing survival even when death would have been easier. And underneath it all, a desperate, aching loneliness that 3 centuries had never managed to fill. Until a human veterinarian walked into her refuge carrying a dying wolf and offered her the rarest gift of all, the assumption that she might still be worth trusting. Marcus gasped as her fangs withdrew, the wound already beginning to seal with unnatural speed. His body felt electric, every nerve ending singing with new awareness. He could see better in the darkness, hear the patrol's movements with crystalline clarity, feel the weight of the air itself like a tangible thing. Your turn, Seraphine said, and there was something vulnerable in her voice. She drew a claw across her own wrist, crimson blood welling up, and offered it to him. Drink. Complete the bond. Marcus didn't hesitate. The blood tasted like copper and smoke and something indefinably ancient, like drinking distilled starlight. And with it came more memories, his own reflected back through her perception. A man who'd seen too much death and decided to spend his life fighting it in all its forms. Someone who'd walked away from comfort because comfort felt like complicity. A healer who saw value in every life, regardless of species or status. And more recently, gentle hands tending her refuge, steady presence that expected nothing in return, brown eyes that looked at her and saw person rather than monster. Someone who'd somehow, impossibly, made her feel less alone. The bond snapped into place between them like a physical thing. Not control, not ownership, but connection. Marcus could feel Seraphine's presence now as a living warmth in his chest, could sense her pain from the wounded wing, her determination, her fear, and underneath it all, something that felt dangerously close to love. Can you stand? She asked, her voice rough. Marcus rose, testing his new body. Everything felt sharper, faster, more. Not vampire-level supernatural, but well beyond human normal. I can do more than stand. Shadow pressed against his leg, whining softly. The wolf could sense the change, the new predator edge to his companion's scent. Marcus reached down, letting the dire wolf catch his scent properly, re-establishing trust. Good, Seraphine said, and her fangs were visible now, her eyes blazing full crimson. The careful control she'd maintained for weeks was gone, replaced by something feral and royal and absolutely done with being hunted. Because we're going to do something monumentally stupid. What's that? We're going to remind my brother's soldiers exactly who I am. She spread her wings, torn and damaged but still magnificent in the firelight. Before I was exiled, I was Princess Seraphine Valdara, third heir to the Crimson Throne, master of blood healing and battlefield medicine. I've survived 3 centuries of court politics and 17 months of exile. And I am done running. The patrol emerged from 3 directions, weapons trained, moving with the coordinated precision of trained killers. The leader, distinguished by additional insignia, spoke in accented human language, probably for Marcus's benefit. The exile Seraphine and a human contaminated by vampire blood. Excellent. 2 problems solved in one night. Surrender and your death will be clean. Counteroffer, Seraphine said, her voice carrying the harmonic resonance of full power. Marcus felt the surge through their bond. She was drawing on him, using their connection to amplify abilities the curse had diminished. You return to my brother and tell him that his exiled sister has remembered something important. You can take away my throne, my position, my comfort. But you can't take away what I am. And what I am is very, very tired of being his convenient embarrassment. She moved. Even with enhanced perception, Marcus barely tracked it. Seraphine became a blur of motion, closing the distance to the nearest soldier before he could fire. Her claws raked across his armor, and where she touched, the blood magic wards shattered. She was using her healing gift in reverse. Understanding the systems that sustained life meant understanding how to disrupt them. The soldier collapsed, not dead but completely incapacitated, his nervous system temporarily shut down by surgical precision. Marcus. Seraphine's voice in his head through the bond. Left flank, Shadow can take him if you distract. Marcus was moving before she finished, his enhanced speed letting him close distance impossibly fast. He grabbed a piece of rubble and hurled it at the left soldier, who turned his weapon to track. That moment of distraction was all Shadow needed. The dire wolf hit like a furry missile, 200 pounds of muscle and fang and fury, bearing the soldier to the ground. It became chaos then, beautiful, terrible chaos. Seraphine fought like something ancient and untamed, every movement economical and devastating. But she wasn't trying to kill, Marcus realized. She was systematically disabling, using her medical knowledge to find every weak point, every vulnerable nerve cluster, every way to take someone out of the fight without permanent damage. She was still trying to be good. Even now, even fighting for her life, she was still trying to minimize harm. Marcus did his best to support her, using his new speed and strength to create openings, to protect her flanks, to keep Shadow safe. The bond between them made it almost telepathic. He knew where she needed him before she had to ask, could feel her intentions through the connection they shared. But they were still only 2 fighters and a wolf against trained soldiers with superior weapons. One of the patrol got a clear shot, and Marcus felt the bolt of crystallized blood magic punch through his shoulder with agonizing cold. He went down hard, his vision graying. Marcus. Seraphine's scream was anguish and rage combined. She abandoned her careful control, moving with pure vampire speed, and the soldier who'd shot him was on the ground in seconds, his weapon shattered. She was beside Marcus immediately, her hands on his wound, power flowing through the bond. Stay with me. I can heal this. Just stay. Behind you. Marcus gasped. Seraphine spun but not fast enough. The patrol leader had circled around, and his weapon was already firing. The bolt caught her in the chest, right over her heart, and she made a sound Marcus would remember for the rest of his life, pure shocked pain. She collapsed against him, her blood hot against his skin, her breathing ragged. Through the bond, Marcus felt everything. The curse fire spreading through her system, the damage to tissue that should have healed instantly, the way her body was shutting down under the compound assault of injury and exile-induced weakness. No, Marcus heard himself say. No, no, no. The patrol leader approached, his weapon trained on them both. The exile is terminated. You will be detained for questioning regarding your contamination. Shadow hit him from behind, snarling, and the weapon discharged harmlessly into the air. The dire wolf had saved Marcus's life, but it didn't matter. Without Seraphine, without her knowledge and her power and her presence, they were all dead anyway. Marcus. Her voice was barely a whisper, blood on her lips. The vial. My blood. You need to. I'm not leaving you. Not for you. She pressed the vial into his hand with the last of her strength. For me. Pure blood, freely given before the bond. Pour it on the wound. It might trick the curse. Make my body think it's being healed by external magic instead of my own power. Might bypass the suppression. Her eyes were closing, her breathing becoming shallow. Marcus made a decision with the clarity that only came when all other options were gone. He shattered the vial, letting her precious blood flow across the wound, and then he did something that surprised even himself. He cut his own palm with a piece of broken crystal and pressed it to the injury alongside her blood, mixing their bond-connected essences directly. You said the curse breaks when you willingly offer yourself to someone whose strength you acknowledge, he said, holding her close. Well, I'm here. I'm offering my strength. Take it. Take everything you need. I trust you completely. I choose you over my own survival. Break the damn curse and live. For a moment nothing happened. Then Marcus felt it through the bond, a shock of recognition, a cascade of realizations. She'd offered him her blood freely. He'd accepted and returned his own. They'd fought side by side, trusting each other implicitly. And now he was literally giving her his life force without reservation, acknowledging her judgment above his own continued existence. The curse didn't break. It shattered. Power erupted from Seraphine's body in a wave that sent the remaining patrol members flying. Her wound healed in seconds, her wings spreading with restored strength, her eyes blazing with full royal authority. The suppression on her fertility, her connection to the hive mind, all of it simply ceased to exist, burned away by the fulfillment of conditions her brother had been certain were impossible. She rose, lifting Marcus with her, and faced the remaining soldiers with absolute command. Tell Cassius, she said, her voice carrying across the ruins, that his sister is no longer exiled. Tell him the curse is broken. Tell him that I am coming home. And tell him that when I do, I will be bringing every piece of evidence I have about Father's real death, because we both know you murdered him, brother. And I can prove it. The soldiers fled. Even with training and weapons, they couldn't face a royal vampire at full power, especially not one who just survived the impossible. In the sudden silence, Seraphine looked down at Marcus, still held in her arms. You magnificent fool, she whispered. Do you have any idea what you just did? Saved your life, he managed. His shoulder still hurt, but her healing magic was working on it through the bond. You broke a curse specifically designed to be unbreakable. You forced me to confront the fact that I'm capable of trust. You've bound yourself to a vampire princess who is about to start a civil war. She set him down gently but didn't let go. And you've made me feel something I haven't felt in 3 centuries, genuinely, terrifyingly hopeful about the future. Marcus cupped her face in his hands, mindful of her still sensitive skin. I'm a veterinarian who treats desperate cases in war zones. Impossible was already my specialty. He smiled despite the pain. Besides, you promised to give me heirs. I was just protecting my investment. She stared at him, shock and understanding and something like wonder crossing her face. You remember that? That's what the curse called for, offering to provide heirs despite being unable to be a traditional wife. It was the title of my exile, the thing Cassius knew would keep me trapped because I'd never trust anyone enough to. She broke off, laughing. You absolute madman. You heard that in my memories and just accepted it as a reasonable transaction. Is it unreasonable? Marcus asked. You save lives. I save lives. Together we're better at it than apart. And if that eventually means children, vampire, human, or something in between, then we'll figure it out together. Everything else is just details. Seraphine kissed him. It was soft and fierce and desperate and gentle all at once. 3 centuries of loneliness pouring into a connection with someone who somehow, against all odds, saw exactly who she was and chose her anyway. When they finally broke apart, the apothecary was still burning, the blood moon was setting, and Shadow was sitting nearby with the long-suffering patience of a predator who'd known his humans were going to complicate everything. So, Marcus said, civil war? Probably. Cassius murdered our father to take the throne. I was the only one who knew, which is why he had to exile me. But with the curse broken, I have standing to challenge his rule. It's going to be ugly. Will you need a field medic with vampire-enhanced abilities and a really good dire wolf? Seraphine smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes completely. I can't promise you safety, stability, or a simple life. Never wanted those things anyway. I can promise you purpose. Partnership. And yes, eventually heirs, children raised in a world where maybe, just maybe, vampires and humans can build something better together. Marcus looked at the burning city, symbol of the failed dream she'd once fought for. Then he looked at Seraphine, at the woman who'd survived impossible exile and broken an unbreakable curse through the simple radical act of accepting genuine trust. "I think," he said, "that sounds like exactly the kind of impossible project I was meant for." As dawn threatened on the horizon, they gathered what they could salvage, called Shadow to heal, and began the long journey toward the vampire territories. Toward the Crimson Throne. Toward a confrontation that would determine not just Seraphine's fate, but the future relationship between two species that had been enemies for centuries. Behind them, Talia's rest burned. Ahead, revolution waited. But for now, in the space between endings and beginnings, a fallen vampire princess and a human veterinarian walked side by side, bound by blood and choice, ready to prove that even the most careful curses could shatter when they encountered something the one who cast them had never understood: the radical power of genuine trust freely given. Shadow loped ahead, scouting the path forward, and in the distance, the vampire territories waited, ancient, dangerous, and about to discover that Seraphine Valdara had returned, and she was done being convenient. Some heirs, after all, were worth more than bloodlines. Some were built from choice, partnership, and the stubborn belief that broken things, whether people, cities, or civilizations, could be